Welcome back to Bitcoin Season 2 Writers Room Edition. What's up, Colin?
What's going on, Charlie? How you doing, man? You are in a beautiful setting, it looks like, and you've been having some pretty fun travels, traipsing around the world.
Yeah, I've been globe-trotting all over the world. Right now, I'm in the Southern Hemisphere in an Asian time zone, specifically Bali, Indonesia, where I found, weirdly enough, there's a bunch of ordinals people. There's a bunch of crypto people here anyway. This little island in the Pacific definitely punches above its weight. Has a bit of higher concentration than your average, like, say, American city for cryptocurrency enthusiasts. But I don't know if that's a good thing. I actually think that might be kind of an obnoxious
having
thing.
more crypto people per capita?
Yeah, exactly. So
I think it depends on who you're asking, and I think it depends on the capital allocation, right?
Yeah.
But before we get into
so for everybody who's hopping in, this is Bitcoin Season 2 Writers Room. It's unscripted. It's highly editorialized. It is Colin and Charlie, Blockspace Media. We are word cells now, so we are going to be the screenwriters of Bitcoin Season 2, where we wax eloquent about all of the new things happening in our ecosystem, and we give some of our spicy opinions. Sometimes we pull apart and criticize. Sometimes we provide edifying response.
Sometimes we butt heads. If your bags are not doing well, like Charlie said, we are the screenwriters for Bitcoin Season 2. That is our fault. Just kidding. We don't.
Yeah, but thank us today, because shit is up. Like, I don't know if you looked at the weeklies. Your JPEGs are up like 60 to 80% this week, so you're welcome. Please kick that back to Bitcoin Season 2. Sponsor a segment. I don't know. It warrants a bit of like touching on. This is not like a Bitcoin Season 2 core narrative, but Blockspace under the mining pod did break the big news of the day, which is that Swan Bitcoin is in turmoil. Somebody is suing somebody, and it's not entirely clear like what all is going on. Colin, just give us a quick summary about this.
The people love a good lawsuit. It is bread and circuses season. It's football season here in the U.S. We've got lawsuits flinging about. We've got Bitcoin ripping. So, as Charlie said, for today, we broke some news about Swan Bitcoin suing former employees and contractors and two companies connected to these employees and contractors over alleged mining theft. Now, mining theft is a very broad term. What did they steal? According to a court filing that we got our hands on, they stole, allegedly, proprietary data and documents related to Swan's mining operation. So, just a quick high-level overview of some quotes from the filing. Swan is saying that the individual defendants, all former Swan consultants, conspired to steal Swan's highly proprietary and confidential Bitcoin mining business, technology, trade secrets, property, and personnel, and then resigned near simultaneously on the evening of August 8th to join defendant Proton, a copycat company, which a former Swan employee, that's the end of the quote, a former Swan employee apparently spun up or allegedly spun up. Now, at the core of this, at the center of this, Swan seems to be saying that its biggest complaint is that these employees downloaded data and documents related to, I think they called it Beacon or something like that. It was basically Swan's mining operating suite. It's probably a patchwork of a bunch of different softwares. Who knows if they're saying it's all proprietary. We don't know exactly what the softwares were, but they were things like hash rate monitoring, weather systems, a bunch of other things related to their mining operation.
And like I think the former Swan mining lead, Raphael, talked about this on a mining pod. He kind of said, we've built this internal product suite, yada, yada, yada.
Right. Check out that mining pod. I believe that was released a few months ago, maybe in...
Yeah, it was like 3 or 4 months ago. It's a very good one, actually. So
what's interesting is it presaged a lot of this stuff, because if y'all know, Swan ran into some financial troubles this year, and in July they laid off like 45% of their workforce, and they completely scrapped their IPO aspirations. A few more things to note about this is that we have a few juicy tidbits from this filing. According to the filing, Swan's joint venture with Tether, which is the mining operation, with 12 exahashes as of July. They started mining at a mining site in Tasmania, Australia, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's crazy. Tasmanian devil mining. No wonder it's tumultuous.
Good stuff. Well, honestly, that's what I should have done for the pick for this one, is a Tasmanian devil with a bunch of A6 swept up in it.
Yeah.
But some important things to note: we had rumors and scuttlebutt that that was pointing towards Tether as being the financer for Swan's mining operation. This court document confirms those rumors. Tether bankrolled the entire Swan operation, and curiously, Tether is not listed as a defendant. I think that's super important. The other thing that I think is really important, and a little breadcrumb for where this might go, in an email that was listed in the filing, Zaguri, the former head of mining, Raphael, that we just mentioned, the former head of mining and the chief investment officer for Swan, said in an email allegedly to some of the people involved in this, Tether needs to send default notice. They do not mention that default notice is going to Swan. They do not mention that it's related to the mining operation. But, if it talks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it flies like a duck,
if it talks like a duck,
you know what
exactly,
I mean?
Yeah.
Ducks be quacking. But seriously,
Yeah.
they don't go out. He's not saying it directly, but I can't help but wonder, is that default notice related to the mining operation? And is any alleged or potential default on Swan's part in regards to the mining operation, why Swan can't take this a step forward and say that this was a takeover of the mining operation, right? We don't know what the contract looks like for the joint venture. We don't know even what the financing terms between Swan and Tether were. Was this an equity play? Was this a loan? We don't know. But it would be very strange for all these employees to just jump ship to Tether and Swan to not straight up sue Tether if Tether didn't have some sort of legal grounds, maybe for taking over this mining operation. I'm not saying that's what's happening. I am postulating that maybe there's more to this story, obviously, than what we're seeing from the filing. And I would not be surprised if there's some sort of, how should we say, outside of the legal dispute, there's actual contractual complications here, which is kind of leading to this whole mess. So quick touch point on that.
Yeah, and how does this relate to Bitcoin Season 2? Well, because Udi tweeted about it.
And also, famously, Udi and Corey hate each other.
Absolutely hate each other.
And Corey hates Charlie by proxy because he hates inscriptions.
But he follows me on Twitter. I think I just haven't tweeted enough, direct Swan FUD. So I haven't popped up on his radar. I think he probably keeps me as I have to pay attention to ordinals because it does affect my ecosystem. So I guess maybe I'm the token guy he follows and we'll see.
Maybe
I don't know, but
I can see the little follow thing here in the corner of your screen share. But
yeah, exactly.
It's Udi cannot resist a good dunk. This was a long time coming. I think he was probably itching to pull the trigger on a tweet like this.
Oh my God. Yeah, he's just been waiting. He's got 80 tweets drafted for every conceivable variation of whatever news story was coming out. And so he just quickly scrolled through, picked one, sent it out. So
it reminds me of what one of my college professors in a history class told me once, that the United States military has a war room scenario for anything you could imagine. And I feel like that's Udi's tweet drafts. It's just a dunk for any occasion. It's like the Pink Floyd song, "Any Color You Like," any dunk you like. Just pick it, choose what you want. He's gonna throw it out there when the time comes.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what Udi speculates, unverified and alleged so far. Meanwhile, we at Blockspace are going to wait for court filings and confirmations before we use terms which aren't allegedly and intuiting and smoke there's fire, those kind of things. So,
but walking around on shards of glass with this being Swan alleged. If you read the draft, in the filing, Swan said. In the filing, Swan alleges. It's I don't want to get sued. But if you're interested in this story, please subscribe to the Mining Pod newsletter at miningpod.blockspace.media. I will be updating it periodically as more information comes out, and I plan to write a more in-depth newsletter following up on what we know from the breaking news, because the article currently on Blockspace is kind of just a primer, getting out the most, the kind of like, the high level details, because there's a lot in the court
there's a lot of.
documents.
Okay. Let's switch gears here. Let's get into
Now
actual Bitcoin Season 2 stuff. So
now I get to grill you. So you have been running around Asia at all of these different conferences with all of our favorite degens and crypto heads.
Yeah.
So what has been your takeaway so far from all the conferences? First of all, tell us where you've been, and then also importantly, what's been your favorite dish that you have tried from the regions that you've been in?
I'll just get right to it. The spicy noodles in Singapore and Indonesia, I just can't get enough of spicy noodle variations of anything. You can get cheap spicy noodles. My wife and I are on this trip, and if we could just take one thing back with us, it would just be cheap spicy noodles on every corner on demand.
Amazing.
This is one very clear culinary superiority going on. So context. I'm on a bit of a tour de force of culture and crypto conferences. Token 2049 in Singapore that was last week. It coincided with the F1 race, actually. Token 2049 is like the crypto conference in Asia, held in Singapore. A lot of Chinese presence, but it's just overall a lot of like Southeast Asia presence. Singapore, for those of you who aren't internationally inclined, is kind of like a bit like the New York financial center of Asia. So, but like, contrary to a Bitcoin conference or an ETH Denver conference in the U.S., like Bitcoin Nashville or ETH Denver or like NFT NYC, Token 2049 and like Asia crypto conferences are just a grab bag. It is what is the most hype ecosystem, and then we're going to absolutely just juice that to the gills. And one of the comments, I think from Nikib at Ordinal's minting website, he had a good comment, which was last year, the dominant ecosystems that were present at Token 2049 were Ethereum, Tron, a bit of Solana, and some stablecoin presence. Right now, this past week, it was Telegram, Ton, Solana, and Bitcoin. Yeah. So I would say if you want to really describe like this particular cycle, it's going to be a Telegram and Solana and Bitcoin dominated one. It is really funny how this is playing out, because you have the two most like product focused ecosystems, Solana and Telegram, Ton, and you have like the oldest, most desirable like blockchain, Bitcoin, and it kind of acts as this barbell in like taste and preference for the just for the types of people who want to build things on blockchains right now. So I have some thoughts on like trends that I'm seeing, and I have a draft piece for like thoughts about Bitcoin Season 2, but back to
That's kind of where I want to take this. So for next week's newsletter, you delivered a draft to me, said Asia is in the driver's seat of Bitcoin Season 2. Unpack that for us. What does that mean?
So if you've been in Ordinals, you could see this. Like a lot of us pretend like, a lot of us would say like, oh well, you know, the primarily English-speaking folks need to hold our JPEGs, and how do we get our quantum cats to go higher? Well, the answer is that it has nothing to do with it really has very little to do with us. The only thing like Bitcoin West has got going for it is like we got the ETFs, which is great. That's not the fun part of Bitcoin Season 2. All of the activity on-chain on Bitcoin has been driven by Chinese and Asian speculation, particularly in the Bitcoin shitcoin ecosystem. What do I mean by this? If you look at like the BRC20 mint spikes, the Runes mint spikes, all of the like fungible token proliferation over the past 1.5 years on Bitcoin, it's all Chinese degen speculation. So this is now translated to like actual presence at these conferences. Every conceivable all these layer twos that we're talking about, they're mostly out of Asia and Asian capital seeding this. And a lot of the liquidity ported over to these ecosystems is, again, from China. A lot of the Chinese whales, which we have maybe considered dormant but existent. So this also means that the personality of the types of things happening on Bitcoin are going to take more of an Asian bent, especially if this continues. And I think it will, because we don't really see Westerners being the primary actors on Bitcoin's base layer. If you want to look at like the types of transactions on Bitcoin, they're mostly related to activity happening in the in the east or west of the United States across the Pacific. So this is my big takeaway, and this is one of the reasons why I'm spending so much time here is because there are not surprisingly, things that you just don't see if you spend all your time in English-speaking Western ecosystems. Like, I've learned a couple goofy things. Like, there's this BRC20 Sats token, which I thought was a brand confusion for a long time. I think a lot of Westerners thought it was a brand confusion for like just the smaller denomination of Bitcoin, the Satoshi. No, it is actually perceived and considered to be like a proxy exposure to the Chinese ordinals company Unisat. Like, that's actually the generally agreed upon like association here. And I was like, oh, well, whoever's minting this probably is like been marketed to that this isn't actually a Satoshi. I could see how they're like making this mistake, but no, I'm the dumb one. It's actually a reference to Unisat.
This would be like someone buying like a BRC20 ticker for Strike, or like, well, you couldn't do that for BRC20, but like a runes for Strike or Coinbase because it's a proxy play for these companies.
Yeah,
that
and I'll get into I'm just going to jump right into one specific rabbit hole, which I think we can then use this to create a bit of a fractal out and look at the broader Asian trends here, which is, okay, this specific Sats token. A lot of people might not know this, but so Unisat captured the lion's share of new inscription volume because people would go to unisat.io and inscribe their BRC20s. This is like 80% of all inscription activity over the past 2 years. And they would all go to Unisat to inscribe their BRC20 degen mints. But for a considerable amount of time over the past year, when that happened, Unisat would just add an additional inscription for a Sats BRC20 mint to the inscription transaction that the user is paying for. Let me say that again. The user is minting token A, and Unisat would just be like, oh, and you're also minting token B for us, and we're not really going to tell you.
So Unisat would keep the Sats. They would keep the Sats
Yeah.
for 20.
Yeah. And this happened millions of times. And only like a few people noticed in the West.
Well, because most people are not going to actually look into the bones of the transaction, right? And figure out.
Exactly. Yeah. You know. I wonder, though, if this was actually described under the like fees model, like, and your inscription fee, and maybe the inscription fee is just obfuscated to actually be a Sats mint. I'm not really sure. I need to go back and look at this. This is going to require some historical digging. Okay. But let me finish this train of thought. So. Yeah. In my view, I'm like, this is really disingenuous and misleading. But I think, like, definitely the Asian ecosystem, like, recognized this. I wonder, and this is where I'm kind of sitting in, and this is where we have these giant cultural disconnect. I wonder if there's like, well, yeah, that's because it's Unisat's token. Like, they're going to do it. If you're going to use Unisat's platform, of course you're going to mint their token for them. So, I just wonder if this is, like, the mentality here.
So this does seem to fall in line with, and please don't cancel me, everyone, but there is this kind of cultural difference, especially in Chinese business culture, where it's kind of assumed that the counterparty is going to do everything they can to maximize their value in a transaction in a way that we in the West and in the US might look at as kind of some like a form of like chicanery or kind of like outright fraud, right? But it's kind of just assumed that if you're going into business with someone, if you didn't think about that, that's your fault. from the
Yeah.
Chinese perspective and the Asian perspective. Like if you didn't think about all of the attack vectors or the chances or the ways in which this company could get the best of you in a transaction, then like you just had kind of a lapse of imagination and you were too dumb to see it coming, right? It kind of
Yeah, I
falls.
also think that I think that's a reasonable, plausible interpretation. I think the other one is that even though like Unisat never said we have a token which is associated with us, and Unisat never really like communicated that they're actually doing this, it could be intuited that when Unisat does this, even though there is no actual enforcement mechanism that this token is a Unisat proxy exposure, the ecosystem just goes, well, of course, yeah, Unisat's minting it. It has their name. It's their token. And so I think the Asians are like, well, if you think if you think Unisat is going to be bullish on, if it's bullish for Unisat, to launch more fractal chains, then I'm gonna buy the BRC20 SAT token because I'm bullish on the company. I think this is like an actual thought process, or something like this does happen, and I just chuckle because I'm sitting over here maybe caught up in my like my Western Puritanism and saying, well, that doesn't make sense, blah 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 blah.
No
A
one
lot of
cares.
Bitcoin Season 2 is about it
Yeah.
not making
Yeah.
sense.
No,
You just have to
I mean,
embrace this.
most of it doesn't mean. I mean, these are tickers. Let's not forget.
Yeah.
These are. I mean, they're tokens, but like whatever the non-fungible or the fungible token stuff on the inscriptions. I've said it many times before. I think it's the dumbest shit ever. But I guess here's my question. So Unisat didn't actually launch the SATS token before. So
They may
it was
have
like
deployed it. I actually don't know who deployed.
It was pre-mining the SATS token through other people's transactions.
No. They were mining it fair and square, Colin. They were mining it fair and square, just on your dime.
The Ethereum Foundation is chagrined that they didn't think of this before. Yes, Jacob, I will have very much fun staying poor, not throwing around fungible tokens. I will say when I was at Ord Denver, I felt like everyone, it was like that New York Times article from 2018. Everyone's getting hilariously rich, but you're not.
If you're not, yeah.
Sitting around
Yeah,
with
that actually gets back into like the whole Asia mindset. Like, I think like if I want to make like a couple points, like, one of my like section titles is that Bitcoin maximalism never reached Asia and probably never will.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? Like, the West is very concerned with why we do things, and we really care about being intellectually honest and pairing that with maybe some way to make money. This is best reflected in Bitcoin maximalism, where we see many Lightning companies launched into what actual revenue model? Like not a lot of like clear like path to revenue for these companies, but they were the ones which were very socially acceptable and very Bitcoin aligned. Whereas in the East, it's like, oh, we're gonna create a quick and fast, dirty multi-sig, bridge over all your stuff. We're gonna just start yeeting points back to you in this ecosystem, and now you have now you're getting points on our chain, and now you're rich and go for it. And this is not a Bitcoin maximalist thing, and I feel conflicted about this, but I say that Bitcoin maximalists never really reached Asia because they are profit maximalists.
Right. And so this kind of goes back into I think something that most or some Westerners might not understand, specifically about the Chinese context, right? And I think this is also part of the reason why, it's funny you're talking about how Asia is in the driver's seat. Asia's been in the driver's seat of Bitcoin for a long time in different ways.
I would argue that it was just a brief few years that we thought they weren't.
And so, I mean, this goes back to the early days. It goes back to mining in China before the Chinese mining ban. A lot of Bitcoin's gravitational pull in the early days was in the East. And I think going back to what you were saying about the profit-driven thing, I think what some people don't really, at least in America and parts of the West, kind of fail to understand or conceptualize about China is how rapid the growth of the middle class in China was over the last few decades. I mean, you just like go Google things like, you know, Hong Kong 1950 or 1960 to now, Shanghai, Shenzhen. Google Shenzhen's a good one because it was like in the last like few decades that it really blew up. I think people don't realize how rapid China accumulated wealth, how rapidly China accumulated wealth, and what came with that were a lot of kind of get rich quick, almost penny stock type schemes like you would see in the Wolf of Wall Street. So a lot of these things are, I wouldn't necessarily say socially acceptable. Maybe they are, but they're certainly more socially ingrained in the sense that these exist. And it's kind of like a big game of musical chairs where everyone knows that you're probably going to get scammed, but you're going to get in and hopefully get out before anyone else does. And I feel like wealth building in the US and the West has always had this kind of, you know, stock market, slowly grow wealth, buy a fucking house, you know, do all, you check boxes, and then you're going to end up being able to retire, American dream, yada, yada, yada. We've heard it 1,000 times. But Asia still almost has this kind of Wild West or robber baron mindset about some of these things, where if you're not going to do it, someone else is, and you're a fucking sucker if you don't try to cash in on it.
Yeah.
A lot of generalizations and stereotypes, but I've just, from a lot of conversations that I've had across the ecosystem, this is kind of the vibe that I've gotten. And also, this is part of the reason why BRC20s were largely driven in Asia, right? I mean, everyone, I was sitting around being like, who's buying this? And I think you were.
Yeah, this is the dumbest thing. People like told me I was the dumbest person ever for being critical of them. Like, I am still critical of them. I think it's the dumbest thing ever. But what I could not foresee was that just didn't matter. I am now full circle in saying I will remain a technical critic, but I'm also now focused on what will drive activity in the Bitcoin ecosystem, because it's not as productive to sit and just hand wring and say,
and like,
yeah, be like, oh, well, you can't do this, because it's an open blockchain.
Yeah.
Like the most powerful demonstration that it is free is that someone is doing something stupid on it.
Yeah. So I think this gets to the heart also about the inscriptions and ordinals debate. And I think the only intellectually honest Bitcoiners from the kind of purity camp were the ones who said, I think this is dumb, but if I criticize this and try to filter it and try to stop other people from doing it, I'm a hypocrite, because Bitcoin is an open network and is permissionless. And yeah. I was really disappointed last year. I mean, you know me, I'm like the token ordinals critic and the block space staff. But I just, you know, I think I just had fatigue from the 2021 bull market, where Bitcoiners were criticizing everything that came out. And it's like, doesn't matter, bro. It's up 500% over the last 3 months. Like, it doesn't matter what you think about it, because it's there and people are buying it. That doesn't mean that you should, and that doesn't mean that it has a use case. But, you know, it's kind of this, Bitcoiners are very, like, that strand of Bitcoiner, and I used to be very much of this camp, are very ideological, and that is fine. But at a certain point, ideology meets pragmatism in the real world, and not everyone thinks like that, right? It's very.
And if we want like an actual a tangible one-liner to take away from this, which I think is productive, I'm going to quote Luke Xie of SatLayer, who I interviewed on Bitcoin Season 2 a few episodes ago. And he says, give me a Western engineering team and an Asian go-to-market team. And he means by this, meaning that typically the Western forethought to designing protocols and making sure that they're set for like longevity and sustainability is very much a cultural thing. This is where we excel. But we do not deliver these things to a market that wants these things. This is where the Asians are the most pragmatic and the best and unmatched, where they will, with startling speed and turnaround, get something out the door and into the hands of a market. That's powerful. We've learned, like, we see this with the Taproot Wizards. Like, many people have tried to propose these soft forks, but if you can't gain traction outside of like the same 50 Bitcoin developers. Doesn't matter if a tree falls in the woods and no one is there to come to consensus around which tree fell. Like, are we ever gonna get a
Right.
soft fork? Like you had. This is where the megaphone angle is important. This is where the go-to-market teams are
Well,
really
and that's
needed.
why
And
Udi and
probably,
Eric
yeah.
have excelled at this, because they're really good at garnering attention on social media.
Yeah. There's another section in here that I want to touch on, which is the topic of KOLs. And the header is China wants the revenue, the West can keep its influencers. What do I mean by that?
That's a good
Yeah, so
subject.
there's this term, abbreviation KOL. It stands for Key Opinion Leader. It actually comes out of China, where they have these kind of large celebrities who will take brand deals and just be the voice through which brands and things communicate to the public. That's like the best marketing strategy in Asia. We might call it influencer marketing, but it's more precise in that these people don't care as much about brand. They just care about being a sales funnel. In the West, we have more influencers, which walk this weird line of like trying to monetize their influence while also trying to increase their influence in kind of abstract social ways. And then when the KOL model moved to the West, we we spent a lot of time getting hung up on like maintaining this ideological superiority. And I say that when some of these people come to say Bitcoin Asia or Token 2049, they find that their superstardom in Western English-speaking ecosystems is not well recognized. Because this is a stream, I'll even like lovingly call out Udi, who I think I really really do respect. But here's a funny vignette. Someone said Udi comes to an Asia conference and is surprised that nobody knows who he is there. And then when he says, I'm the founder of Tapper Wizards, they all say, "Oh, you're Maven's bot. You're the Tapper Wizard artist." And he's like, "No." Like, "Oh, you launched the Wizard BRC20 token." No. You're the so like I'm kind of I'm parabolizing this, but like this is a good example of like the type of dynamic where you don't run a big WeChat supergroup. Like that is
Right. That's
yeah.
the meta over there. And I think it also just goes back to what mediums are important for communication between the East and West. I mean, there's still such a structural barrier, not just like there's literally a language barrier, but there's also a communications barrier. There's a cultural barrier. These ecosystems between the East and the West, in terms of the people who are active in Bitcoin and crypto, really couldn't be more different in a lot of ways. And they're completely disparate, right? So again, we've said it a lot, but I just think it always bears mentioning that there's like an entire population all the way around the world. You have no idea is active in any of this stuff, and they have no idea that you're active in any of it at all.
Yeah, one of the best things you can do, and I think this would be very good for the Udis and Corey Klippsteins of the world, is to realize most people using Bitcoin have no idea you exist.
Which is a
Even
good
though
thing.
you suck.
How it should be.
Yeah, it's a very good thing. That's the best thing I can imagine.
Yeah, it is for sure. The influencer culture too in the US, I feel like, is just such a byproduct of the fact that the entertainment industry is one of our largest exports, right? I mean, it's no surprise that the country with the largest output of media from music to movies is creating this class of totally vapid, completely self-obsessed social media profiles and personas, right? And
Yeah.
And then it kind of you were talking about, I think you mentioned earlier about this influencers have to figure out how to monetize their personality. I had an unfortunate run-in with this earlier this week. I got invited to a Mario Nafal space. Nafal, I don't know how you pronounce it, but It was
You were in the
for,
wrong space, dude.
dude, it was for, and I don't know why they reached out to me to do it, and I won't spend too much time on this tangent, but it was with regards to decentralized physical infrastructure networks, which
Yeah,
is just like,
decentralized
yeah,
penis,
DePIN,
as I call it.
which is a completely recycled concept from the ICO boom. I mean, there were projects saying we're going to tokenize everything from supply chains to EV charging stations to hospital records. I mean, and so like the basic idea is that you have a blockchain network that somehow manages or stores data, and then people get tokens for building things. And of course, I go on there being the toxic piece of shit that I am. And the first thing that I do, knowing, by the way, the entire time, this is totally pay for play. I'm probably going to get kicked for saying this. Said, like, what does this even do? What is the peak network? Like, that was one of the guys who's up there. It's like, what? This doesn't make any sense to me. And no one obviously could answer the question, not even the guy who was like the head of growth for this thing. And it was one of those, it dawned on me, or maybe it just reinforced my understanding that this whole influencer culture is at least very, how should we say, damaging in the West in some ways, because people get sucked into these spaces because the guy's got 1 million followers, and then they get fed absolute tripe and bullshit regarding all of these new crypto applications. And they don't even know that we've already been here before, an entire cycle, 2 cycles ago, where all of this stuff was peddled and it was dumped on people. And, you know, maybe, I don't know, not trying to profile because there are scammers everywhere, but some of this stuff is being launched in a place that they don't even know the language, right? Halfway around the world. And all of the people who launched it are laughing their way to the bank because they're making millions of dollars. It's kind of a tangent. I think maybe I just totally reneged on all that.
What's crazy is, like, I think in the East, like, most of them just know that all this is bullshit. In the West, we have this weird
Yeah.
lack of self-awareness, which is the irony.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, my grandson's been telling me this blockchain is the future. Well, my medical records are going to be on it one day, and it's like no one knows how any of this works. So,
Well,
anyway,
as far as, like, yeah,
no, go
but
ahead.
yeah, like, that's the whole thing. No, like, obviously we're generalizing. But I do think that it's important to recognize these trends, and that if you're going to look at on-chain data and, like, user behavior on Bitcoin, you're going to have to understand these are the personalities and the drivers of the, like, user behavior on Bitcoin. Like, this is why Fractal is such a big narrative. I think we're the only people who, like, continue to cover it, because it's like, it's something which doesn't make any sense to the West. Because it doesn't make sense, but these are economic participants, big ones, and this is only going to increase. As the ordinals and JPEGs continue to skyrocket and outperform Bitcoin, again, not financial advice, this is my opinion, you're going to be sitting here wondering, like, why is this happening? This doesn't make any sense. Nobody actually wants a wizard in 10 years. They all want the Bitcoin. And you're just going to miss the path that we take to get to this, you know, Bitcoin proliferated world, which I think is as important as getting there. Because if you need to be able to navigate the just like the weird and zany world. This is what happens if we want to tie it off with a Bitcoin maxi view. This is what happens when money dies. When your fiat system and state systems collapse, it's going to look incoherent, and people are going to be making what seem to be incoherent decisions, and they are incoherent. But it's not maybe the individual's fault. It is this crumbling system, and this, like, bouncing around trying to figure out what's the actual answer. And I'm just so happy that the people, even if they're gambling here, that they're gambling on Bitcoin because they're in such closer proximity than 95% of the rest of the world. So that's my Bitcoin accelerationist view.
Tap the sign. You know what I'm about to quote.
Yeah.
It goes back
Quote
to
it. Do it.
It goes back
Tap
to a
sign.
DM that you sent me in November of 2023, and we were talking. You basically were opining on exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
why ordinals and inscriptions are taking off. When money dies, people put their money into increasingly riskier assets in hopes of getting a return that will beat the inflation that they're experiencing that is eroding their purchasing power. And you sent me this excerpt from When Money Dies, a fantastic book about the hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic after World War One. You can't really understand a lot of what went on in Germany between World War One and the outbreak of World War Two unless you understand this inflation. And this is the excerpt. What was to be done? Casting around, people found a life raft. Shares. They were the only form of investment which kept pace. Not all the time and not all shares, yet on the whole, they managed to keep up with the depreciation of the Reichsmark. So everyone dealt in shares. Every minor official, every employee, every shift worker became a shareholder. Day-to-day purchases were paid for by selling shares. On wage days, there was a general stampede to the banks, and the share prices shot up like rockets. The banks were bloated with wealth. Obscure new ones sprouted up like mushrooms and did a roaring trade. Every day, the entire population studied the stock market listings. Sometimes the shares collapsed, and thousands of people hurtled towards the abyss. In every shop, every factory, every school, share tips were whispered in one's ear. The old and unworldly had the worst of it. Many were driven to begging, many to suicide. The young and quick-witted did well. Overnight, they became free, rich, and independent. It was a situation in which mental inertia and reliance on past experience was punished by starvation and death. The rapid appraisal of new situations and speed of reaction was rewarded with sudden, vast riches. So obviously, we are not at the point with the U.S. dollar here in America where like people.
Yeah, I don't think it's a Weimar situation, but this is like the mental
this
model
is the framework.
to have.
This is the model, and this is also why people like my father-in-law, God bless him, I love him. He still does not understand Bitcoin, and he will never understand it because to him, the way you build wealth is you buy a house and you dollar cost average into the stock market. And I'm over here trying to explain to him why I don't even think I'm going to be able to draw Social Security, and that just completely doesn't make sense to him at all, right? And it never will, but it doesn't necessarily have to, right? And I think that's the thing here. It's like the boomers got theirs. And this is what I try to tell to all of my friends. It's like, if you're not looking at what's going on in this crazy bullshit ecosystem that we call crypto, this is your roaring 20s, bro. This is your housing boom. This is your .com boom. This is the post 2008 recession liquidity orgy. This is the only thing in the near future that you can actually look at for positive growth, in my opinion, right? And so, like, to your point, it doesn't have to make sense, but it is happening. It's also why, if I had been less of a Bitcoin maximalist during the last bull run, I would have probably done better with my Bitcoin denominated wealth, right? But
you also got to exit. That's the thing.
That is true. So
it's just as treacherous.
It is.
It's just as treacherous, but I just think it's just as treacherous. But also, like, if you're sitting in Bitcoin too, you're still facing an 80% drawdown anyway. Like, you may as well just realize that you're already in an incredibly treacherous, volatile industry and embrace it. I think we spend so much time trying to say that Bitcoin is this perfect asset. No, it's much more better than anything else. But it's like, you're still kind of insane for holding it. But embrace the reality that is still insane.
Bitcoin is the most pristine collateral we've ever seen. A million cyber hornets buzzing around, securing the greatest network backed by energy in the world.
Bro,
anyway.
I think Saylor ran out of aphorisms to say. He's now reached. He's
like, hey, you should custody your Bitcoin with banks.
Yeah.
Did someone say controlled opposition? That's allegedly. That's not.
One clear trend of Bitcoin Season 2 is that it flies in the face of Saylorism, which I think is healthy. I think it's very, very healthy. And there's not as many like Saylor opposition. There's not as much Saylor opposition in the West as you think. And it's not Saylor opposition in the East. It's just in practice they're like, why would I put my shit in an American ETF, paper-denominated Bitcoin? I'd rather go lock it up in a different type of multi-sig where I can get points.
Yeah, that may or may not be more risk. I do think, just going back to this one more time before we maybe wrap it up with the ordinals numbering debate, just very briefly, because I know we wanted to touch on that. I think that this is going back to the idealism versus pragmatism. it's kind of like the open borders argument. And I lean libertarian. I used to argue for this, but in theory, open borders only work if everyone's doing that. And a lot of arguments within the Bitcoin maximalist subculture kind of go the same way. It's like there is a certain ideological limit to what will actually happen in the real world. And you can either decide to understand where other people are coming from, or you can say that they're idiots and they should listen to you because you have a more pristine worldview. And that's gonna, we live in a world with, 8 billion people, guys. That's just eventually these things are going to come to a head, and you're going to meet some resistance where you don't want to. So I'm going to step down from my soapbox. Tell me about why certain inscriptions.
We're gonna do it in under 2 minutes here. So it's the 1 year anniversary of what's called the Great Inscription Renumbering Debate. If you go to ordinals.com or Magic Eden or Ord.io, you see you've got a JPEG and it has a number associated with it. And how that happened is when Casey launched Ordinals, his website just added on the front end like, oh, this is the first inscription, inscription 0. Oh, this is the 100th inscription, inscription 100, just to kind of keep track. Well, this became early on a mechanism for trading. You would want earlier or lower number inscriptions. As inscriptions began to look less and less JPEG-like and more BRC20-like, and as we got into the millions, it got really confusing, like what your number is. But if we also consider that early on, Casey just kind of like put this ordinals idea out there with a functional client, but there were still some like edge cases which were not accounted for. The ecosystem took off, and there's still like a lot of holes to be plugged and issues to be fixed with the actual reference client that Casey was building. One of the responses to this meant that like there would be things which would be called inscriptions but weren't recognized by the ordinals client. So what do? Do we insert those canonically where they'd happen and just shift the numbers on the front end of the website? Do we add those at the tail end? Well, the Casey's kind of, I think, harebrained response to this was, let's call them curse inscriptions, give them negative numbers, and then at some later date grandfather them in. And that was a fun little like meta, and I do think that people just don't understand like that this is fun, but it's problematic from a protocol design standpoint. I just spent the whole episode talking about how the West gets caught up in this, and here I am doing the exact same thing, where like most people I realize don't understand how ordinals work, and they don't understand how the actual JPEG gets onto the chain. This is really important if we consider that inscriptions might be more than just JPEGs. And I actually call this out in my article for Bitcoin Magazine, where I say on this topic, something which I think is prescient, which was not common at the time. Thinking long term, my personal opinion is that the primary use case of inscriptions will not be JPEGs and collectibles, but rather things that take advantage of Bitcoin's data layer, roll-ups, state updates, data preservation, documentation, etc. In such a case, we should be designing the protocol not for collectibles, but for diverse functionality. Our descendants will look back on us and wonder, what were we thinking adding this unnecessary complexity? And then they'll just jump back to what I call time chain sequencing. Now, that may have been kind of a buried lead, but this is now the like dominant personality of what's called the inscription envelope and data blobs on Bitcoin. Whether it be off-chain index protocols to fungible token states, like this is a story of Bitcoin's data layer waking up and people doing all sorts of crazy stuff with it, and it's not just your JPEGs. So there were some workarounds that Casey and Raf came up with. They created a secret numbering system underneath so that the public numbers wouldn't be changed, but their own internal numbers.
Everything was.
Yeah, but like the way that it required them eating glass and chewing glass, in my opinion, I'm probably going to get on a plane and type out some thread here, is that the thing is that the engineering folks, the devs who were tinkering on this, found that the ecosystem's rejection of them saying, please just give us some time to we should renumber this. The ecosystem, the market rejected this, and a lot of these devs were like, I'm just not as interested in ordinals anymore. And a lot of people left the ecosystem during this time, and their names we have forgotten because they were just on GitHub. And a lot of the people who want to build things in ordinals have such trouble finding competent developers. They're like, I just wish I could get a good Bitcoin dev because there's like only a few dozen. And I want to say to these people, you created this situation. You created an ecosystem which only wants market participants and does not care about protocol design. And so I also think that, I mean, we're fine. There's still a lot of great competent devs. I think the carrot as an the carrot of get paid a lot to go build a thing is still a very powerful tool. But I think I look back at, there's a lot of people who kind of made it uninteresting for them to participate because that was a clear signal. It was a clear transition from ordinals becoming an enthusiast thing to a market-driven ecosystem. So maybe this is the way that it all happens. And I do also at the top of the article reflect, and I have this one line, which is, these days we often wax eloquent about the early days of Bitcoin and the great visionaries who participated in the discussion on protocol development. However, we often forget that the cypherpunks of old were human too, that early oversights and unresolved disagreements resulted in cumbersome idiosyncrasies that define our sacred blockchain today. If you weren't around in 2009 and want to get a taste of what it was like back then, come join the discussion in Ordinals Land. We're speedrunning Bitcoin consensus. So
I really like the Bitcoin consensus. I love the speedrunning Bitcoin consensus. And what it immediately makes me think of is people who said at the onset or outset of ordinals that it attacks Bitcoin's fungibility. And it was very interesting because for some reason they couldn't understand or they didn't know that the numbering system is only if you're running an ord client, right? It's only if you're running an ordinals node. In the same way that
but it's also like this would then be reflected on like explorers and stuff. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's like this whole thing is its own ecosystem within Bitcoin that has its own rules and leverages the protocol. And I don't really have anything else to say about it but that. I just really like the speedrunning Bitcoin consensus line.
Yeah.
And
so anyway, I might spend some more time diving deep on this. This is a challenging topic. It's also, I also don't know if I want to open up up this can of worms again. I just,
I don't think it's like would be good for engagement baiting, but
yeah,
nothing's going to happen, right? I mean, it's kind of like a Lindy effect, right? The longer this system is in place, the less likely there's ever going to be anything to unseat it. So, we're doomed to have cursed inscriptions. But
we jubilee them. That's a whole other topic, but we're gonna leave that for another day. We're gonna try to keep this tight and wrap this up.
We wanted to go 30 minutes or 45, but we just can't help ourselves. So.
We can't help ourselves. This is good. This is a good thing.
This is a good thing. But thank you all for tuning in. Check us out at Blockspace Media for all of our content and podcasts. Follow your boy Charlie Spears at CBS Spears on X. I am at As I Lay Hodling. You can also find our other Twitter accounts or X accounts for the podcasts and for the publication at large at Blockspace Pod, at the Mining Pod, and tune in every week for the Writers Room. We usually do it on Fridays, but we're doing things a little differently because Charlie is a globetrotter. And I think that covers all the bases. Oh, go subscribe to the Mining Pod newsletter and go subscribe to the Blockspace newsletter because Charlie, your boy, is going to be spitting some fire this coming week. And with that,
yes,
I think
to the degens, you'll have so much alpha if you subscribe to our stuff. So much alpha, you'll get so rich. Not financial advice. See you all next week.
This is it.